This street runs from Lancashire in Sun Valley all the way to Valley Circle in Chatsworth, clear across the valley about 15 miles. Without traffic, that's about 35 to 40 minutes. So with traffic, like 2 weeks maybe.
2 weeks, yeah.
So let's get straight to the meat of it. A Roscoe is a slang word for a gun used in a robbery. That's what a Roscoe is.
You're kidding.
No, it's not commonly used anymore, but that's what the slang word for Roscoe is.
Is Roscoe used in The Thin Man?
Probably. Now that I know what it is, I feel like I've heard it in like James Cagney movies and stuff, because I think it can refer to any gun, but specifically a gun used in a robbery is a Roscoe gun.
Okay.
But why would that be the name of a street? There's some holes in this story, but the reason it's called that seems to have been based on one incident. Okay. But again, we've got to take it back to the beginning. Fade in on a sleepy offshoot of a sleepy Pueblo town that would eventually be known as Sun Valley, in the valley. In 1874, the area was owned by State Senator Charles McClay, but in 1876, the Southern Pacific Railroad, which Old Rosie had founded, and then the Roberts family moved in to set up a general store near the train stop that was there. It's not a stop anymore, but the train still runs through there at San Fernando Boulevard and Sunland Boulevard, which is now a Metrolink track just off the 5 near the Sun Valley Library, and Daniel's Tacos, where we got champurrado that one time.
Oh, that's right. That was good.
It was really good.
Yeah.
Probably the best champurrado I've ever had out of 3 times I've ever had champurrado. So let's just talk about champurrado.
Wait, can we please?
Throw these notes away. At that time, the area was generally referred to as Roberts because that's where the Roberts were. But meanwhile, in Monte Vista, which is now called Sunland, there was a rancher named, I kid you not, Farmer Johnson.
Son of Farmer John?
Yeah, they were Scandinavian. He had 2 sons named John and Cornelius, and they got their water from a stream that ran through their property from Big Tahunga Canyon.
Okay.
But to set up this Shakespearean tragedy, that was not all. No, there was another son. A 3rd son named Alvarado, who lived a little south of them, who also relied on that same stream as the water source for his farm. But in the late 1880s, Farmer John's son got the idea to start his own water company, but to do that, he had to dam up the stream on his property. So this meant his 3rd son would no longer have a water supply, but he figured 2 out of 3 sons loving me is good enough, so he just did it anyway.
Right.
So now the 3rd son, Alvarado, sued his dad, but he lost. So now he not only had a farm that was starting to fail because it had no water, he was also in debt to his lawyer for suing his dad. So then Southern Pacific started raising their prices to ship produce, and now Alvarado's farm was bankrupt, thanks to his dad. He could no longer afford to farm, but he still had the land, and on it worked 2 guys named William H. Kidd Thompson and George Smith, both of whom had criminal records.
Okay.
And wouldn't you know it, not long after this, there started to be a bunch of unsolved Southern Pacific train robberies in the area. And then the robberies came to Roberts, the area that is now Sun Valley. The first one to happen at that station was on December 23rd, 1893. It was a rainy night, and the train from downtown was headed towards San Francisco. Amongst the passengers on the train were a few men who got off at Burbank, and then the train kept heading north. And then at around 11:30 p.m., it started approaching the station in Sun Valley, what is now Sun Valley, where it wasn't planning to stop, but suddenly 3 men with covered faces, wearing dusters, rode up on horses with pistols and Winchesters alongside the train, waving their guns. Then the men who had got... they were pulling up their pant leg. Room for one more. And my friends with guns. Then the men who had gotten off at Burbank actually hadn't gotten off at Burbank. They had just snuck up to the front of the train and were waiting for this moment, and then broke into the conductor's car. So their plan was to run the train off the tracks to buy them more time to get away after they robbed it with the help of the men on the horses. But the conductor instead negotiated that we don't have to do that. Yeah. I'll stop the train and run away, and then when you're leaving, give me a signal and I'll come back. And then I can call the police, which we don't have phones. So the train stopped at the station, the Sun Valley station, and the men started shooting off their guns just to scare people away from trying anything. And then they took out some dynamite and blew their way into the car holding the values, took $150 worth of stuff, and rode away on their horses. There were no injuries, but they also couldn't be tracked because it was a rainy night, so no one knew who did this, but you and I do pretty clearly. If you know the facts, it's pretty clear who did this.
The lawyer did it.
It was Rosecrans. But then just a couple months later, the culprits here that you and I know were Alvarado and his gang, but those stupid people from history had no idea, decided they needed to pull the same heist again in the same place. So Alvarado and his men were going to try the same thing. But this time, things did not go according to plan.
Why would they?
They got practice in the first time. It can only go better. Everything you wanted to do last time, like say stick them up, you can do that this time.
You forgot last time, you could do it this time.
At around 11 p.m. on February 15th, 1894, before, the train was once again approaching the station in Sun Valley when the conductor, David Thomas, saw someone at the station holding a torch, pointing a gun at him. The conductor decided, I'm not doing this, so he didn't stop.
Nuts to this.
See you in St. Louis.
See you in the funny paper.
With Judge Marmaduke. So he decided not to stop, but the man fired the gun, so he sped the train up to get away, but just up ahead, the guy outside the train had already flipped the track switch, and the train was now speeding towards no train tracks. Luckily, the conductor saw this at just the last second and reversed the engine, so he prevented a catastrophe where the train would have flown off the tracks, everyone would have been killed. But since he did that, it did still derail, but they just got lucky again because it had been raining and the ground was soft, so it just skidded into the mud and it didn't go flying. But two of the freight cars that were filled with oranges did spill everywhere, so there was just a bunch of oranges. So it must have smelled great.
You're describing mostly like comic strip chaos, and I'm sure someone's about to get killed right now.
Oh, this is like some comics, which, like The Watchmen or something. So meanwhile, there were again two of the robbers in the actual train, so they now ran to the front to pull the job, but what they found was much more intense than last time. To start, a 19-year-old named Harry Daly, who had been stowing away under the train, when they derailed, got thrown into the left cylinder, which is the thing that goes chug, 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 and was killed immediately. Then the 27-year-old fireman named Arthur Masters, who worked on the train, he got his legs crushed against the hot boiler plate of the train and was now pinned between the two cars, screaming in agony. God. So now the three robbers were shooting off their guns over the sound of this guy screaming in pain. Then they blew open the safe with dynamite, which this time was filled with stuff from the Wells Fargo Express Company. So they got several $1,000s in cash and 7 sacks of gold and silver coins that weighed about 75 pounds each. They loaded all this into a wagon that they made look like it was a milk delivery truck, and they got the hell out of there. When they did, the rest of the train came up to help Masters, who is the guy pinned. He was in so much pain, he was begging people to shoot him in the head to put him out of his misery, which nobody would. So he said, just give me the gun and I'll do it myself. But they didn't, and they did what I think you're not supposed to do, and they tried to get him free. And 10 minutes before they finally did get him free, he had died because why wouldn't he die?
Yeah.
So 2 people were killed horribly in this robbery, and the haul was so big that they set a detective on this to solve it, and his name was Will Smith. Railroad detective.
Oh, God. Was all of this fake and you're leading into the Wild West?
I'm pitching a reboot of the Wild Wild West. Even better, he first assumed it was done by a bandit that had been going around named Chris Evans. Captain America himself has finally broken bad. Your precious hero is finally turning against the country you love. But then some actual clues started coming clear. A passenger on the train described a man who had been sitting on the train that fit the description of Kid Thompson, who was working with Alvarado. Yeah. Then some of the gold coins that had been stolen turned up at a bordello that had been used by a guy who fit the description of Smith, who was the other guy working with Alvarado. The police put out a $1,000 reward for the identity of these 2 men, and when Alvarado's brother John saw this, he immediately tipped off the police. He ratted out his own brother because he recognized the men, and he had also seen a wagon coming onto Alvarado's ranch early in that morning after the robbery. And then sure enough, the police found wagon tracks matching that of Alvarado's wagon near the scene of the crime that led to Alvarado's ranch.
Oh my God.
But before they could get there, Smith disappeared. Thompson fled to Arizona, so the only one left was Alvarado. So he was arrested, but shortly after released because there was just a lack of evidence. 8 months later, Thompson was caught laundering his money in Arizona and was turned into the police, and Smith finally turned up as well and agreed to testify against Alvarado, who then confessed and then himself testified against Thompson as being the one who threw the train switch, who then turned right back around and accused Alvarado of being the one who threw the train switch. Smith seemed to be let go, but in May 1895, Thompson was sentenced to hang for this, but ended up just all he got was a life sentence in Folsom Prison.
Half hanging,
an emotional hanging. Then on November 17th, 1895, Alvarado was sentenced to life in San Quentin for this robbery. While he was there, he escaped once and was recaptured, and his wife divorced him. He was paroled in 1907 and moved to Washington, but in 1920, he came back to LA with his new family and reconciled with his brothers. A sweet ending to the story until September 6th of that year. He was driving with his brother John, and they got hit by a streetcar, and Alvarado was thrown clean out of the car, fractured his skull, and died 3 days later. Saddest character. This guy would live on Second Place Street.
is the second place, yeah.
Anywho, the street of Roscoe used to be just a plowed ditch that bisected the valley to delineate the line between Lancashire Ranch on the south and both Maclay and Porter ranches on the north. But it was called Roscoe because that part of town around the station where this all happened changed its name to Roscoe until 1948, when the people of the area didn't want their town associated with such a horrific event, and they voted on the new name Sun Valley. Peaceful town. No gun valley.
Yeah, no weird activity here.
No history in the train tracks. But there's still controversy about the name because in the articles I was reading, they still refer to that station as Roscoe Station, even when the robbery had just happened. Yeah. So either they changed the name really quickly, or it already had that name from another incident with a robbery. Yeah. Or some people think that it was the name of a robber from before, or someone who worked on the train, or maybe it was just the name of a land developer. But this robbery did happen here, and even if that might not be why the area was called Roscoe, it's the story people associated with the name Roscoe, and was painful enough to them to put it to a vote to change the name from Roscoe. So it's easy to just brush off street names because we've seen them a million times, but names do mean something, and stick them up because I brought my Roscoe with me today.
I thought your pants looked big. You don't usually wear a duster.
Well, I'm trying out a new look. Your forearm doesn't seem that rigid and like you have something strapped in there.